Jordan Plotkin is a man with a mission. A baseball pitcher and scholar at Yale in American history, and now in Los Angeles, writing and composing. He managed to avoid incineration and make it here this evening. Jordan Plotkin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to start off with a quote by Oliver Sacks from his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Hippocrates introduced the historical conception of disease, the idea that diseases have a course, from their first intimations to their climax or crisis, and thence to their happy or fatal resolution. He thus introduced the case history, a description or depiction of the natural history of disease. Such histories are a form of natural history, but they tell us nothing about the individual and his history. They convey nothing of the person and the experience of the person as he faces and struggles to survive his disease. To restore the human subject at the center, the suffering, afflicted, fighting human subject, we must deepen a case history to a narrative or tale. Only then do we have a who as well as a what, a real person, a patient in relation to disease, in relation to the physical. So, I'm a storyteller of sorts. I write music for movies, I write musicals, screenplays, short stories, and poems. And at the moment, I'm making my first documentary, a very personal tale of daily life with chronic illness, featuring a virtual orchestra and choir comprised of musicians around the world living with chronic illness and disability. And I believe that stories, like mathematics, history, and the laws of physics, exist independently of our recognition of them. And it is the role of the storyteller, much like the archaeologist, to extract from the chaos of the world a pattern or a greater truth. Okay, so Oliver Sacks says we need to bring storytelling back to medicine, and I'm saying stories exist everywhere, we just have to know where to look, with the eyes of a storyteller. So what good does this do, especially for a patient living each day in the bowels of an invisible illness, in pain, seeing the world through a depressive hopelessness and helplessness? So I'm not going to answer that just yet. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little story. So it's April 12th, 2015. The membranes surrounding my spine and brain spontaneously rupture, causing cerebrospinal fluid to leak and my brainstem to compress against my skull. The neurological and cognitive impairment is severe and unending with neither a diagnosis nor treatment in sight. I'm a medical mystery and a bedridden Yale sophomore at the very beginning of what will become my medical odyssey. In the traditional three-act narrative framework that underlies our favorite novels and films, this would be considered Act 1. It is here that we are first introduced to our main character, me, the setting, a college campus, and some sort of problem that the character wishes to resolve. I'll let you take a guess on that one. The first doctor I see refers me to mental health services. Over the next 4 years, I will see 56 doctors across 6 states and 2 countries. I'll be hospitalized 5 times and will be prescribed over 30 different medications. So now I'm a junior in college, perpetually foggy-headed and plagued with dementia symptoms like memory lapses, tremors, and incontinence. I'm always on the verge of vertigo, triggered by anything from scrolling on a phone to subtle temperature increases or a slight turn of my head. I'm prone to head rushes, kind of like when you get up too fast, that can last for up to 30 seconds. My cardiologist is stumped as to why my blood pressure drops when I'm active and shoots up the moment I stop. Mind you, when I say active, I mean relatively active. At this point, I can't really walk up a flight of stairs without becoming faint and winded. I'm a senior now, and a new phenomenon has emerged, in which I'm suddenly unable to speak. The words and sentences form in my head, and when I go to speak, nothing comes out. Sometimes 15 seconds elapse before any sounds emerge from my mouth. So I graduate, move to LA, set up a studio to continue my work composing music for film. At an appointment with a UCLA orthopedist specializing in the spine, I am told once again that my imaging results are unremarkable. I ask him if he's taken into account the measurement of my claviaxial angle or my grab-Oaks line, but he dismisses these as insignificant, tells me I've been reading too much online, and then proceeds to say verbatim, if you had a problem with your spine, you would feel it in your spine, not your head. If you have pain in your head, you have a problem with your head. I say, but they're connected. And I plead desperately to no avail. I get home, download computer software to view my various MRI and CT scans, determined to find what 15 radiologists did not. Following a hunch, I spend the next 2 weeks reading every medical paper I can find on cervical and atlantoaxial instability and their connection to EDS, cross-referencing significant measurements detailed in case studies with the measurements I take from my own scans. And I find it. The truth speaks in millimeters and degrees, revealing what has been there all along. Severe instability between my skull and the first 4 vertebrae of my cervical spine. Quite literally, my head is not screwed on tight enough. So this would typically mark the midpoint of the story arc, the point at which the stakes are raised, the full extent of the obstacle revealed, forcing the protagonist to take action. In Homer's Odyssey, this is when Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca in disguise, sees how dire the situation has grown in his absence, and hatches a plan to restore order. At the end of Act 2 comes the climax. In my tale, it's surgery. Physically, it is the point at which the stakes are highest. It is the pinnacle of risk in the story thus far. But it is also the narrative climax. For beyond this point, we will know whether or not the protagonist has reached his goal. So after being officially diagnosed with EDS and the associated spinal instabilities, I undergo surgery, a fusion from my skull to second cervical vertebrae in my spine. And it works. Now we commence the third act and final act. My neurological symptoms are resolved and I am left to recover from surgery itself while looking ahead and reconciling my reintegration to normal life with the knowledge that I have an invisible chronic illness and my life will never be normal. I will live like a game of whack-a-mole, giving a good old knock to the medical problems that will inevitably arise in the future, resolving one until the next one pops up. Great, so I've told you a story, a chronology of events that follow the basic structure of a Hollywood blockbuster, and I've been so kind as to spare you the accompanying melodrama. So, did I realize as the weeks and months and years unfolded that I was living in such a narrative framework? No, of course not. I walked into each and every doctor's appointment thinking, just hoping that it might be my last. And while living, one seeks resolution. Rarely does one seek conflict, specifically conflict of a seemingly unresolvable nature, just for the sake of narrative intrigue in the memoir they will one day write. The narrative is shaped afterwards, in hindsight. There's a reason why patient is both noun and adjective. A patient is the ultimate embodiment of patience, an ability to remain unwavering and hopeful in the presence of adversity, to remain faithful to one's character before the looming specter of unknown. The word character itself first appeared in ancient Greece around the time that Hippocrates was practicing medicine and was used to describe a symbol or imprint on the soul. The idea of a character as part of a story or play came nearly 2,000 years later, in the 17th century. So just as the idea of a patient comes from one who is patient, the idea of a character comes from one who embodies their own character. In his letters to a young poet, Rainer Maria Rilke writes, "You must be patient like someone who is sick and confident like someone who is recovering, for perhaps you are both." But for those of us living with chronic illness, whose pain, though invisible, seeks to transform our lives, to shape our narratives, it is not enough to be patient. We must live like storytellers, hungry for answers, relentless in our quest for the resolutions that we will write into existence. But no story can get past even the first act if it has only a single character. And yes, while some characters bring with them conflict and ill omen, it is those other characters who inspire progress, give hope to narrative development, and help the protagonist achieve resolution. So doctors, nurses, surgeons, therapists, hospital administrators and technicians, assistants, researchers, benefactors, families, friends, and kind strangers, thank you. Though at times you might feel the burden of forever being a supporting role, just know there would be no story without you. Thank you.